Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series. This episode was made possible by a generous sponsorship from Bioforum. For more information, visit bioforumgroup.com. In this episode, Taryn Grome, Editor-in-Chief of Pharma Voice, meets with Tanya du Plessis, VP of Data Strategies and Solutions, Bioforum, the Data Masters.
Tanya, welcome to the WOW podcast program.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
And we're excited to have you. And thank you for joining us from South Africa. We're going to get into that in a little bit because I find that whole thing fascinating, that area in which you're working. You've been working in data management capacity for about 15 years. What are some of the biggest trends you have seen, and what are you looking forward to in the coming years?
Yeah, so been around the block a few times, right? 15 years is quite a while. So it's been a very interesting few years. And, if I look back to where I started to where we are now, it's really totally a different world. And, really in the beginning, we had such a heavy paper-orientated industry from the data management perspective, but even from other perspectives as well. So it was all about the paper. And I think some parts today are still, unfortunately, paper heavy, but it was very much about that. So there was a big move, and we're still moving away from focusing on the way we collect data and rethinking it to be more effective. So way back when, and this is in the very early days of my career, having things very paperweight, and then watching things in my early days as a project manager, also many years ago, but nonetheless moving over to EDC, and now most recently, and probably thanks to the pandemic, a real big focus and a push to making a lot more electronic. So that's been one of the biggest trends I think that I've noticed. But alongside with that, realizing that we can use technologies such as EDC platforms, like I said, more recently going into eSource and things like that. Along with that comes analytics, because you have your data right in front of you, and also your metadata right in front of you. So how many queries are you raising? How far is our clinical team with reviews and things like that? All of a sudden, more of this started opening as we started becoming more electronic in our focus towards our data collection. So kind of in parallel, but maybe just a snitch behind that was, and still is, our drive to find real effectivity in our work through standardizations and being able to see more and do more with our data. And this has really been consistent. I think we've had that throughout. I almost want to say I've never been to a conference or anywhere where that hasn't been something that's been spoken about very heavily. So those are the two biggest trends I think that I've seen throughout my career in the industry so far.
Oh, I'm with you in terms of that, looking back to the days of paper and looking at all those slides where people had the cartons and cartons of paper in
yeah.
storage in the back warehouses. And now it's taken some time for the industry to trust the cloud, as it were, to make sure
Yeah.
that data were secure, right? And again, I go back with you to the EDC days and thinking about all those different systems and the technology, and every site had a different system. Every CRO had a different system. Every sponsor had a different system. So to your point about standardization, this is really a move in the right direction.
Absolutely. And, it's one of those things, I think, like you said, it scared everybody at first. So they were kind of like, hang on. And I remember having these conversations with our customers back then. They were like, but my data's out there now. Like, it's not close to home. It's not something in my hand. It's out there. And it took a lot. I think we're generally a bit of a distrusting environment. And I think perhaps because we're so well regulated, and it makes a big difference. So now, when you can start seeing what you can do with things, it's kind of like, hang on, technology is actually, something that I can use here. And now that we're trusting it more and more, I think the doors are right open, to be quite honest, with regards to what we can do and how we can manage our trials going forward. It's really exciting times ahead.
I agree with you. And I think back to that analogy where people would, trust their personal financial data in the cloud, but they wouldn't trust their clinical data in the cloud, which I
Right?
think is so interesting, right? And another point I want to touch upon that you brought to the fore is about the analytics piece of it, because data is just data until you can actionate it. So we are looking into the movement of data scientists, and that's becoming such a hot topic right now. And how do you use that data?
Exactly. And again, it's about that all of a sudden people have realized, but I can do more with this, right? So there's another driver in this, and that is the whole risk-based, I want to say risk-based mindset. And it's not just about risk-based clinical or risk-based data management or quality management, but it's the actual mindset about managing your risks on the study and focusing your attention where it should be focused. And that has driven the need even more for our analytics and technology, because you need to see what's going on. And if you're going to take risk-based approaches like our regulatory authorities are encouraging us to do, you need to have all of that aligned. So you have a high-level understanding of where you are, and that you can then dive into that high-level understanding into the thick and the details and the data if you need to. So it's becoming more and more core. And so in the past, I would say people were using analytics. It was kind of like a nice to have, right? So if you had analytics, let's say, for example, 10 years ago, dare I say 8 years ago, it was kind of, well, this is a nice thing to have, and you're definitely ahead in the trend. And we're really hitting an area now where it's kind of like, I don't understand how you're functioning without this, almost, like, let me show you how much better your life could be if you just used a bit more of this. So it's really been pushed to the center of our clinical trials, not just on data management side, but truly at the center of the clinical trial.
Excellent. And all that needs to be built in way before the trial starts, right? So when you start to think about your data management strategy, when is it that you start to think about that when you're talking with a sponsor or a client? Is it in those initial conversations?
Yes, absolutely, Taryn. So I think that's also maybe one of the changes we've seen. For many years, data management was kind of a bit of an afterthought on the clinical trial. Well, not an afterthought completely, but let's say not the highest priority. So trials would be designed, protocols would be written up, the decision would be made already. For example, we're going to go with this EDC platform, and speak to the statistician around the data specifically, but not necessarily the data strategy in terms of, right, how are we collecting this data? What are we going to do with it afterwards? Is there metadata we want to look at? What analytics are we going to look at continuously? So with these things becoming more and more, I want to say, forefront and requirements, it's kind of pushing data management really more to the front of the queue in terms of the people you need to talk to while planning your trial. So we really encourage our customers to say, invite us to the table. We understand there are plenty of clinical elements. We're not taking, I want to say, any thunder away from that. It's hugely complex as it is. But you need to think about what you're going to do with it. Our teams are only as good as the tools that they can use often. So if we can bring you solutions that are going to make your life a lot easier, I almost want to challenge and say, why wouldn't you want to use that? But very much to your point, we need to be at the table in the beginning for those conversations. So people need to think about what they want to see. And the honest to goodness answer, and sometimes with that, is they don't know, right? You don't know what you want to see. You're not quite certain what you need to monitor. There might be some high level ideas, and of course, all driven a lot by our primary and secondary endpoints that we're going to be watching, like in Hawk. And but there may be additional factors that one doesn't think of. So for example, if you're conducting an e-source trial, we've always got this little window in the back, like, hey, if you needed to use a paper form someday, it's okay if you transcribe it, and we mark those forms in our electronic databases. It's been transcribed, so that we know that the source is not truly on the database. It's actually on a piece of paper somewhere. But if someone's not checking how often the site is transcribing data, you might end up with a site that's just using your eSource platform that's supposed to make their lives easier as a transcribe, and in effect actually an EDC platform. So that's an example of like a logistical factor that you kind of need to think about from the beginning when you start planning. And that's why we say, invite us to the table in the beginning. Let's talk to you about this. And especially for us, we're a data focused CRO. So we always say, and quite proudly so. We are the experts. We don't want you to worry about this and have sleepless nights. That's what we're here for. We're taking that burden on for you. So let us do that thinking. Let us bring that experience to the table, and help you plan those analytics and reviews and visualizations and risks you need to monitor, than what you try and figure through or wade through that immense amount of information on your own.
Tanya, so you're the one who has the sleepless nights then? No, I'm kidding. It makes total sense to be invited to the table early on, because if the objective is to get a drug to market, then it's based on all of that clinical trial information that is all data based. So it just makes perfect sense to have you all there at the beginning. Well, I'm glad to hear that is becoming more and more frequent, because it is so important. And I would think that it also would help on reducing so much of the efficiencies in a clinical trial, and improve the efficiencies to make trials run faster and less expensive and safer.
Absolutely, and that's what we're all working towards, right? Our industry is very expensive. We all know that. If you speak to any company, they will tell you, come on, like the costs are crazy. And I think specifically for us, we really work a lot with the smaller guys, so the small to mid-sized farmers, and that's a real thing for them. Having a budget is a budget. It's not, there's no, I want to say, side pocket or a little bit of a pot you can dip into if you need to. They try to build the buffers in, but it's a different approach, and the cost factor is something that is quite heavy on a lot of pharma companies. So the more we can do to release that burden, and the more we can do to support them in terms of building those standards and the activities in from the beginning, so that they don't have surprise things like change orders where they have to pay for hidden costs all of a sudden, the better for everyone, right, at the end of the day. So that driving efficiency is really the engine behind all of this.
And it's interesting, you talked about the smaller to mid-sized companies, and we're seeing so many more drugs come out of the pipeline and to approval from those smaller to mid-sized companies, and not so much from the big biopharma companies, which certainly have their place in the industry, by all means. But so let's talk about what some of those differences are, in addition to the smaller budgets of those smaller companies. What are you seeing? And since you work with so many of those types of companies.
Absolutely. So, first of all, I think we all like the underdog and the small guy, right? So I think we all get excited when we see things like that. We all kind of get excited and root for them. And I think you're 100% right in saying there's a bit of a mind shift change there. So I think for many years, the smaller companies and some of the mid-sized farmers even, it's almost like the business MO was to get the IP noticed, get it to a point where someone else will see it, and then we can sell it off to a bigger farmer. And although that's perfectly healthy and it's fine, you're kind of handing it off to someone whose pocket's a bit deeper that can perhaps take it further. It's been really exciting to see a lot of these smaller companies really get excited and push their own drug, and get it to submission. So it's really great. I think the biggest difference, when you work with a smaller company, is the fact that it's things that in the past, for example, that you use with bigger companies, like fixed processes and hard lines in terms of this is how things are going to run, make it very hard for those companies. Like I said, their budgets are not so big, and they don't always have the expertise in-house. Many of our customers, say to us, listen, we have no data management experience. We have somebody who can take responsibility here and will help you sign things. They have a high level understanding, but we can't get into the details at all. And that's really where these companies need help. And I want to, I almost want to say, when I say help here, I'm not talking about the standard service agreement where we have a contract, we're service, we're going to offer this service that's in this bucket that they're given. These companies need someone to partner with them. They need companies such as Bioforum that can really be flexible, that can hear what their needs are, and can think of novel approaches to try and help them with, the budget, of course, so trying to find different ways of achieving something without having to go through stringent costs. And then additionally as well, thinking of, I almost want to say, how to complement the team with their lack of in-house support often, and not overwhelm them. So there's a difference between overwhelming somebody and throwing a lot of information at them and making them feel really small, and I almost want to say insecure almost about what they don't know, and really partnering, right? So that partnership is really key for these companies. So we always say to our customers, look, we're in it for the long run with you. So tell us straight up, what do you need from the beginning? We were speaking about the analytics and the strategy. Small companies think that they can't have that, and it's so untrue. Like I said, if we're invited to the table from the beginning, we can share all these exciting things. It doesn't have to cost as much as what they think, and then say to them, what is your long run here? How far do you want to go? And that's really great. So then we speak to them and we say, right, what is next after this? How far do you want to go? Are we going submission package, even though we're not quite there yet? And see what they want. And then we partner with them and we plan the whole way. So there's a significant difference. Just in the way that the approach to the clinical trial needs to be done. With a big pharma, of course, a little bit different. Processes are there, the engine runs, you can really pick up a fast pace. But I think that's the key to any good, successful organization, right? Being able to adapt to your customer and being able to adjust to their needs.
Excellent. There's a lot to unpack in there, but the resounding theme I'm hearing is that it's really you're looking at the individual needs of each sponsor, and it's not a cookie cutter approach. You're really bringing a consultative kind of thinking to each one of the projects. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a perfect assessment. Absolutely that, because each company's needs are indeed different.
Excellent. Let's switch tacks a little bit here, if you don't mind. In your current role, I know you are charged with overseeing a number of different teams and their activities and deliverables. And you're operating from South Africa, where Bioforum's headquarters are in Israel, so on a global basis too. So what are some of your keys to leadership and success? How are you managing this global operation?
So I laugh a little bit because I think it's never been as visible as it was, almost want to say, in any phase as what it is this year, being an under pandemic situation, right? So I think I've been very blessed in my career. I've always had the global aspect. So I've always worked for companies that operate globally, and Bioforum is no different. We're very much a global company. So yes, I'm based in South Africa. We have colleagues in Israel. We have colleagues in Australia and the US, and actually in Europe soon. So we are very much global. And I think with that global culture comes an understanding that, we have different cultures that we're working with, and we have different ways of approaching the same thing, but we need to produce the same product at the end of the day. So regardless where a project manager sits, for example, we as Bioforum need to make sure that the delivery is of the highest quality. And that really starts with our people. So in terms of managing the teams, it's actually been really great. And like I said, this year, because everybody kind of got forced home, we've all been in lockdown in strange circumstances where our work and our personal life kind of really crashed into each other. And it wasn't just one or two people, it was everybody, right? So I think it highlighted on a global level the fact that we have tools out there that are very much available, and we have almost want to say learn to use them a little bit differently. So now we video call a lot more, right? We use Teams and we like to look at each other. So in the past we might have been a bit shy, don't use the camera, I'll see you next week if I'm visiting the US, for example. And within our organization, actually, we've really adopted that very well, and it's been really great. It brings a real personal touch to it. So on the global level, I think, again, like I said, operating as a global company made it a bit easier. And being in the leadership side, I've always said leadership is about, it's not just about you, right? I think that's the biggest mistake that one can make in a leadership position, is assuming that you are the reason for the success alone, because there's no ways you would be where you were without your team that's strongly backing you. So and that was a little bit tough, to give people that recognition, because face to face is much easier. You can see someone, you can say thank you, and people can genuinely feel that sincerity. So we got a few creative ideas within our company. to socialize a little bit more online, one-on-ones with the senior management, with the individuals. And I'm not speaking about, you know, for example, me calling one of my directors or senior directors, but actually speaking to project managers and asking them how it's going. So we've had a tough time this year, I think, as many have had, in terms of trying to balance work and life, but in terms of working remotely and growing our company, because we have definitely almost doubled in size this year, which has been great, has been actually smoother than we thought. Yes.
So right, so you're managing all of this, and you're growing at the same time as you're working from home, and you're hiring, I would assume, people that you haven't actually physically met, right? If you're growing so quickly. So that's a whole different, aspect to it. And I'm hearing that quite a
Yeah.
bit. So it takes a little bit of a shift in terms of your leadership style, your management style, and your HR style, to be quite honest, because it's a whole
Absolutely.
different ball game. So I think the pandemic has been a great leveler on many fronts, right? You're not the only company that's had to figure out how to work remotely. All companies have. And I also think it's allowed people, as you said, to interact on a more intimate basis. I know from our experience, we're seeing people in their bedrooms, in their laundry rooms, with their kids, with their cats, with their dogs, whatever it
Yeah.
might be. But it's really been quite it's brought humanity to the world, our world, in a different way, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, we actually tried to encourage that a bit, because we lost a lot when people went home. We lost their interaction. We lost the social chats in the kitchen. We lost the quick impromptu lunch dates. And it was hard for a lot of people, especially the extroverts out there. So we tried to replace that. So, within the Bioforum team, we did things like, because much to your point, and as a company that grew a lot, the last thing you want is your new employees to feel very isolated, because if you put yourselves in their shoes for a minute, they're now starting with a new company. They might know one or two people from their previous history, but they don't really get an energy from the office. They can't see anyone. They don't know, how things work. They're trying to figure some of the tech things out. So it can be quite a daunting place. And that's the last place we want our new employees to feel. We want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel, that they're really joining a family and that they're part of the team. And that is something that we really try to push a lot. So we have, for example, we have what we call workless meetings. And we try to do it once a week, at least every second week on a global level. And we had, for example, just 2 weeks ago, we had bring your pet to the call. So everybody joined the call with their pets, and we all got to see each other's cats and dogs, and it kind of brought in a different level. So we tried to embrace that a bit, and it brought that human factor back, which I think we all miss.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also think too that we're seeing a shift in leadership style towards more empathy, an empathetic kind of approach to leading, especially in these days. And that's a significant shift in my view from what we might have seen 5 or 6 years ago, where empathy might have been considered one of those softer skills. But now it's really
Absolutely.
becoming one of the keys in the toolbox.
Absolutely, Taryn. I couldn't agree more. And I think the biggest reason for that is the people who kind of have a very authoritative leadership style have no one to be authoritative over now, right? they can yell virtually and they can give instructions, but it's not quite the same as being in a room. So I actually feel a bit, almost want to say, I have a lot of empathy for them, because they probably hit the ground quite hard, realizing, I'm not getting that I need from my team anymore. And exactly what you said, the leaders that are more empathetic and have more of a touch with humans were more successful, because that's what the team needs in uncertain times. So I think I was very lucky, and then I find myself as much more of an affiliative type of person. So I very much get my energy from my team as well, and perhaps years of experience have taught me that leadership is only as good as the team underneath, as I mentioned earlier. So if your team is unhappy and they don't have what they need, then you're not going to get the results from them that you want them, what you need in order to deliver to your customers at the end of the day. So it's important to focus on keeping those people happy and, making sure that they're there and that they are heard and noticed. So from my perspective, you know, when I look at my team, you know, it's important that people are placed in the right roles, that they are enjoying their job, that they have all the tools that they need for that job. We're not just giving them tasks and leaving them high and dry. And then, you know, lastly, I think the one thing that sometimes gets a little bit overlooked is that people actually want to have a voice. They want to be able to voice concerns. They want to be able to share, you know, their thoughts. They want to be, and it's not negative. I think that's the biggest thing. Sometimes management is scared to open that door because they're worried about, you know, having to deal with all this negative feedback that you're going to get. But I almost want to challenge companies out there to open that door. The feedback that we get, you know, having real true open door policies and trying to connect very much with our people is that people sometimes just want to say thank you or they just want to share a good idea. And we've really taken some of those good ideas that have come right off of the floor, people that are touching and working data every day, and driven with them on a business level. And without having that one-on-one, we would never have gotten, you know, that really great idea, because that person felt, you know, a little bit too shy or didn't actually understand how great that idea was. And they didn't have the opportunity to share it before then. So I would challenge any company to really change their mindset. If they're still a little bit in that old school authoritative role, they're almost missing out a bit, I would say.
I would agree with you. I would say too. You know, speaking of those ideas that come from the floor, from those folks who are involved at the grassroots level of the organization, tell me about some of the interesting or different projects that you've worked on that have inspired you.
Oh, wow. So I think, you know, at the heart of me, I always joke a little bit, but I say I really am a data management nerd. I really enjoy the data and the interesting side of things. But having said that as well, I really enjoy a challenge. So in my career, I think I've been lucky enough to be in teams that were handling forefronts of innovation. So, and it's going to sound really strange, perhaps under circumstances, but I actually really enjoy the pandemic-related trials, and not just COVID here as well. I was lucky enough to be involved in Ebola trials in my past as well, which we also know wasn't quite a global pandemic, but definitely an African pandemic, and for Northern Africa was very crippling, much like we're feeling now. So, you know, having that exposure, those were great. You know, it really forced me and the people around me. I learned so much from the people around me in those times to really, I want to say, move out of the norms. We had to think about things totally different back then with the Ebola trials. And we have a little bit more to I want to say, to our advantage now in COVID-19, where we have things like, you know, eSource, using ECOA, where we're collecting data differently, no longer paper to be typed into EDC, but we can use tablets and enter directly into databases. You know, back with the Ebola days, that was very new. It was almost unheard of. It was something that some companies were kind of thinking about trying, but not quite there just yet. And we found ourselves in the situation. And I think now more than ever, it makes sense to everybody when I say it, but you know, nobody wants to go into the red zone. So when you're thinking about collecting data and you're thinking about how we need to bring clinical trials, we need to bring medicine to these people, we need to find a solution, a vaccine to these, you know, horrific diseases, pandemics, you know, it's really touching for everybody. But how do we do that when nobody wants to go out there? So we have a few people that are there. They're our health workers. They are the heroes of the day. They're in our hospitals. They're working there. So how do we get our, I want to say, technology to them to help us collect this data so that we in turn can generate, you know, the data that we need and get vaccines and things like this out to the people. So it really pushed the boundaries on all sides, on timelines, in the way we collect data. And we saw the same thing now with COVID. We were building databases at crazy speeds. You know, normal turnaround times for some of our bigger databases, anywhere between 8 and 12 weeks as an industry as a whole. And I think there was almost a standard turnaround time of 2 weeks or less for database builds for COVID. Yeah.
Wow.
So we broke boundaries. We really we pushed walls over and we built new channels, and it was really amazing. So maybe I'm just a sucker for the crisis management. I don't know. Maybe it's a flaw more than an advantage, but I really enjoy those types of trials, and I think I've been privileged to be able to take part in two big ones, being the Ebola and the COVID outbreak now.
Well, thank you for doing all that you're doing. And you're right. I mean, I think it forces these kinds of crises force you to think differently, and it's not just we have to think beyond the status quo when you're pushed to do so, right? So this is one of those pushes. So kudos to you and your teams for doing such great work. You know, you touched upon something about the Ebola crisis. And that's not that long ago. So think about the leaps and bounds that have been made in terms of the data collection, as you said, going into the red zones. And now we are in a place, because this is not the first pandemic we're going to face. It's not the last pandemic, rather, that we're going to face. There's going to be another one
Yeah,
coming down the pike. So we need to take those learnings and figure out how to improve on the improvements, even so that we can be even
absolutely.
further ahead the next time.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you. Yes, we enjoy being part of it, and I always try and tell my teams to remember. It's easy for people sometimes to forget that we played a role in it. So I try and motivate my team and remind them, that medicine going to market went through your hands at some point. So you should be proud of what you do. So thanks very much for that. And yes, we need to move forward, right? It's it's really exciting, and that's why I say it's changing the way we think and pushing the boundaries there. I mean, like I said, a 2-week build is something that was unheard of. It's not something that you would have done at all, and yet it happened. Here we are, and it sparked a new wave of thought as well. So if you're speaking to the tech companies now, and there are very many vendors out there that are trying to drive more I want to say cost saving and effective solutions out there. It's not just on our end; it's inspired them as well. So it's really great, and I think if at the very least, what we learned out of this specific pandemic is that we're maybe a little bit more nimble than what we think. So customers in the past that were thinking, they can't even think about something like moving their platform to a e-source concept where there's no more paper, kind of found themselves in a pickle here where, if you had a very paper-based process and you were reliant on certain people at certain locations to get your data, well, your engine stopped now, and it caught everybody off guard. And I think that high risk kind of came to the front now. So I think at the very least, and those companies, many of them did a really good job. We spoke to some of our customers that were like, what do we do now? We need to continue this trial, in many cases because, the IP, the investigational product is actually working. We don't want to take this away from our patients. So how do we continue our trial, still collect our data, and keep the regulatory authorities happy, but rethink the entire way we're collecting this data? And they did well. They did
Right.
very well. It's a colossal problem, and they did well. So I think a lot of companies realize they're a bit more nimble than what they thought they were. And there I have to just give a shout out to the small and mid-sized companies there again. That's when one really sees how innovative these companies are. They can turn things around quickly. They can make decisions quickly, and they're really great and nimble. So perhaps in these circumstances, maybe it was a tad bit easier for them, I almost want to say. Not that it was not difficult in any way at all. It's just that this really great characteristic that they have of being nimble, quick decisions, flexibility, really drives innovation within those companies as well. So it was something quite phenomenal to kind of watch from the side.
That's awesome. Tanya, do you think this momentum can be carried forward? Do you think that there's a danger of sliding back to the old ways, or has the toothpaste out of the tube and it can't be put back in?
I definitely think the toothpaste is out of the tube. You know, once you make the decision to change the way that you're going to approach your trial, it is a big decision, and you put a lot of effort and energy into that. So it's changing processes, it's changing thought patterns, it's changing the way you're going to do something. And I almost want to equate it to this. We were all going banking. right? All of us, if you needed to put money into the bank, you went to the bank with your envelope, you filled out the slip, you stood in the queue at the teller, and we all did it. It was very normal. If you needed cash, you went to the ATM, you stood in the queue, and that's how you did it. And you had to go to the ATM every week because you needed to buy groceries and so forth. And that was fine for us. That's how we lived. If I had to ask anybody else now, I'm going to take away your app, I'm going to take away your smartphone, and I need you to please go to the bank your salary, make sure you got cash. Who would put their hand up and volunteer for that, right? I think very few. Maybe a few for remnant's sake, right?
Yep.
But once you're there and you're using that technology, you have the app, you're transferring money between your accounts, you're swiping your card. I myself very rarely have cash with me. Why would I? I can swipe my card wherever I am. I transfer money. My salary comes in electronically. Our debit orders go off. So I cannot actually fathom going back to using the bank. And I think that's where we are in clinical trials. I think once all circles, regardless of whether it's at the site or on the pharma side or even on the CRO side, once you've tasted that technology, I think it's going to be, even on a personal level, a choice not to want to go back to the old way.
I think that's a perfect analogy. Well done. You obviously, well, I can hear you're such an inspiring person. I'm totally inspired by your view of where data management is going, where clinical trials are going. But I'm curious, who do you look to for inspiration? Who inspires you?
What a great question. So at the risk of sounding a little bit cliche, I really do find my inspiration when I look at our team and on a global level. And as you mentioned earlier, especially this year, seeing the personal side of people, you see people sitting in their homes, they have their children around them. We all had a homeschool at some point, right? Which I think was a global challenge, never mind, one on a level. And, it was every mother out there, whether you were sitting in my seat, whether you were one of our data scientists, or whether you were in our programming team, we all had the same challenge, and we were all yelling at the 7-year-old the same way to get the handwriting right, so it was very inspiring to me. And I think even now, we have hardworking people, they're dedicated, they're there, and they put their hands up all the time. So, it's when things get tough sometimes, and we have lots of deadlines and things are crazy. I always am astounded at our team to see how they just click and go in together. So the people really motivate me, and I think perhaps part of who I am, I'm a bit of a people person, so I get my energy from them as well. But some days are heavy. I think everybody has those, and that's really my family is my rock. So wonderful husband and 2 boys, and at the center of that, my faith. So I think that circle really keeps me going.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And what a nice shout out to your teams. And finally, because this is our WOW podcast program, please tell me about an accomplishment or a WOW moment that shaped your career.
Wow. Wow and wow. So
Wow.
going back to those, I almost want to say the Ebola days. I think there was a pivotal a change for me there. It's been an interesting drive, I want to say, of my career for me so far. But if I look back and I'm most proud, I think it's of those moments where I was part of teams or leading an initiative that broke molds. So it's really important to push those boundaries, and I feel like especially when challenged with those kind of scenarios on those trials specifically, we really had to push through many challenges, and we had to change not just our thinking, but we were almost tasked with changing, the entire setup of the clinical trials thinking. Luckily, we had a huge amount of people that were there to help us out with that. But I was very privileged to be part of those teams, and really learning how to I want to say, understand the full team dynamic. The center of the sentence is not I. There are many words that go with it, and in order to make it make sense, there's letters and pronunciations and different types of words, and the same goes in our teams. So that, I think, was a very pivotal moment for me. And I almost want to say, as a woman, if I think about where we are as an industry, it's wonderful. I think we're very privileged to be in this really great industry, and me specifically, where I have been. If I look back to when I started to where we are now, how wonderful and how blessed I have been in my career, and especially being in the Bioforum team, which I don't know how many people know, but we're actually we're very heavy on the estrogen. We have a very high percentage of ladies, especially in our senior management roles within our company. And I think that shout out to our CEO, Amir Malka, who's really, I want to say, an inspiration to all of us. But I think having that, seeing how things work and working for a company that's really so dynamic, and like I said, not shy to put the ladies in the driver's seats, has been really inspirational for me, and really helped me get to where I can and be the best I can be in my career.
Wonderful. Tanya, I can't tell you what a delight it's been to speak with you, and thank you so much. And I learned quite a bit today, so for that I thank you as well. I wish you continued great success, and thanks for being part of the WOW podcast program.
Thank you, Taryn. It was lovely to be here. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast, and thanks to Bioforum for making this episode possible. For more information, visit bioforumgroup.com. And don't forget to check out our other episodes of WOW at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2020 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks LLC.